Hey, I'm Dan Thomas, and welcome to my channel for the Newbie Woodworker. The return spring on my drill press broke a couple of days ago, and I just got the replacement spring, so I thought I'd repair it on camera. What could go wrong, right? Well, hopefully nothing, but stick around and find out. The more I learn about how my tools work, the less magical and mysterious they become. They're not actually rocket science, believe it or not. And one quick way to learn about how a tool works is to have something break. We all know that turning these feed handles ends up raising and lowering the spindle and the chuck. But how does that work? When you move the handles, they turn this shaft that goes through the drill press. The shaft is actually called a gear shaft because obviously it has some gears on it, and those gears work with some gears on the spindle to raise and lower it. So what causes the spindle to move back up when you release the handle? There's a cap on this end of the gear shaft, and inside the cap is a spring that looks something like this. Actually, it looks exactly like this. When you turn the spindle this way, the spring tightens up and you can feel the resistance as it compresses. If you let go of the handle, which I don't recommend, the spring will unwind and turn the gear shaft in the opposite direction, bringing the spindle back up. The spring is also what keeps the spindle up when you're not touching the handles. As I was using my drill press, I heard a snap and suddenly the handle was loose. That's a good sign the spring broke. If it were just too loose, I could adjust it by turning this cap, but of course that doesn't help when the spring is flat out broken. I'm going to remove these two nuts and take off the cap. But be careful, if your spring isn't broken and you remove the cap, the spring might come out of the cap and you'll have trouble trying to get it back in. I've already removed this cap once, so I know nothing bad will happen, at least not with the broken spring, but the odds of the new spring ending up flying around the room are about 50-50. Piece of cake. Here's the spring inside the cap, and it broke off here. The rest is still in the drill press. This is where it broke off. The end of the gear shaft is split, and one end of the spring goes into the split portion. It just slides off. I did some internet searches to find a return spring for my drill press model, but didn't find anything specific. But I learned what I needed to measure to find one that fits. So I measured the thickness of the metal, which is around 9 millimeters. Yes, you need to measure it in metric, not inches. The width of the metal is about 8 millimeters, and the inside diameter of the cap is around 40 millimeters. Here's the Amazon page I used. The drop-down has a bunch of options. The first number is the thickness of the metal. The second is the width of the spring. And the third is the length of the spring when it's uncoiled. The thickness of my spring's metal is around 0.9 millimeters, and my spring is 8 millimeters wide, so these look like a good choice. I certainly didn't want the spring to be wider because it might not fit in the cap. I wasn't sure about the lengths, but when I clicked on the 1000 millimeter one, it said it was 42 millimeters in diameter, and I assume that's when it's compressed. Since the inside diameter of my cap is 40 millimeters, that wouldn't work. So I clicked on the 680 millimeter one, and its diameter is 36 millimeters when compressed, so that sounded perfect. I ordered it, and it came the next evening, which was yesterday, and here I am. Now comes the fun part, installing it. First, I had to remove the broken spring from the cap. The outside end of the spring is hooked around this tab in the cap. I didn't think I could get a good grip on that end, so I just grabbed the broken end and yanked until it came out. You can see the hooked end of the spring and the tab where it goes. The new spring has a wire wrapped around it to keep it coiled. I wanted to get this end hooked over the tab without unwrapping the wire. So I got the wire as close to the outside edge as possible without releasing the coil. I started to put the coil in the cap, but I realized I couldn't reach the part of the wire that was twisted together, so I pulled the spring back out and bent the end of the twisted wire out. I finally got the hooked end over the tab, and I pressed the spring all the way down into the cap. I had thought removing the wire was going to be the trickiest part, but the wire got knocked off when I pushed the spring into the cap, so it came right off. And there it is, no problem. Let's hope putting the cap back on is just as easy. According to the manual, this is called the boss. Like a boss. One of the 3 notches in the cap goes over the boss. This bent end goes into the split. I put it on and added a nut, just enough to keep the cap from coming off, but not so close that I can't still turn the cap without the boss getting in the way. Then I tested to see if the spring would bring the spindle back up. I kept turning the cap until I got the tension where I thought it should be. I went to put the second nut on, but there wasn't enough room on the end of the shaft, so I pushed the feed handle to the left, and that caused the cap to come off the notch. So I had to find the right tension again, making sure the feed handle was still pressed to the left. When I finally got it to the right spot, I added the second nut and tightened them against each other, jam nut style. You still want a little room between the nuts and the cap. And there you go. Believe it or not, that's all there was to it. And if I wasn't filming it, it wouldn't have taken more than a couple of minutes max. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you found it useful, please give it a thumbs up and consider leaving a comment. Check out the description for links to products seen in this video. Just scroll down, click Show More, and scroll down until you see the links. And if you like what I do here, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to ring that bell to get notified about new videos. Thanks!